Okay, we are ready to go live on the YouTubes.
Beautiful.
All right, we are good, and I am handing host duties back to Karen.
Thank you. Caitlin, may I ask you, the questions are going to come up in Q&A or in chat?
They have either option,
Oh, well, I can't do both. No, okay, there we go.
but I'll don't worry, I'll keep an eye out for the questions, and I'll give you a heads up if anything comes in here or
Did I miss?
on YouTube.
Great. Oh, thanks.
Mhm.
Welcome, everybody, to our talk back for Swonderful, an evening with George Gershwin. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I'm Karen Bowersock, Executive Artistic Director here at Bristol Valley Theater, and I'm hosting tonight's chat, which is generally hosted by our technology expert, Miss Caitlin Macnica. But she is the director of this play, so she's going to be responding as that person. But don't kid yourself. She's also doing all the technical stuff because I'm just a pretty face, really. So I'd like to introduce the rest of the folks that are on our panel. First, I'd like to say that Shelley Barish, our scenic designer for the show, is stuck in traffic in Boston and hopes to be able to join us at some point during the proceedings. But going to my well, I don't know what you're seeing, but I will say to my left is director Caitlin Macnica, also Associate Artistic Director of BVT, joining us from Rochester.
Hello, everybody.
And then we have our author, playwright, arranger, and star, Michael Radi. Our I'm a sound designer extraordinaire with the set behind him, Rich Miller. In the left-hand corner on my screen anyway is Miss Megan Finley, our stage manager. Oh, Shelley just says she's about to jump on. Great. She made good time. And then next to Megan on my screen is our lighting designer, Greg Solomon. And coming in just a second will be Shelley Barish, who's coming to us just having gotten out of her car from Boston, our scenic designer. So we got quite a group tonight. The first comment that I see popping up from Terry, who's one of our attendees tonight. Michael, we enjoyed your play and performance. It must have been easier to produce than The King's Legacy. Is that true?
Well, it depends on what you mean by produce. I did not have to design the set or the lighting or any of the production elements for either show. So I would have to let the designer speak to that.
Well, to create, perhaps, is what Dorothy means. Is that, was it easier to create this piece than it was King's Legacy? I'm sure they had different challenges. That's a great idea to compare and contrast. For any of those of you that are watching that does not know the King's Legacy, it's another wonderful musical that we produced at BVT that Michael wrote in our 2019 season. It was a much larger production, certainly from a cast point of view. But do you want to talk a little bit about the difference between writing one and writing the other?
Sure. The King's Legacy took me about 7 years to write before it was being produced, and went through a very long development process and many different versions and workshops and readings. And so that story was very complex. For any of you who saw it, it has a lot of characters being played by only 9 people. And so figuring out how to weave that story together was really what took a long time in the creation process. Whereas with the Gershwin show, not to say that it was easy to write, especially because it was a very condensed period of time to develop this piece. But the idea that we were basically taking a linear look at Gershwin's life and career and his music really helped structurally in putting it together. And so, yes, I would say ultimately the Gershwin show was easier to create than King's Legacy, but it was it was still a fair bit of work.
So this is, for those of you who haven't heard me say it 100 times, or this is a world premiere, which means that this is the first time it's ever been performed for an audience, that Michael created it to help us out at the BVT, so that we could bring a musical to, in the time of pandemic, when you didn't want too many people on stage and you didn't even want musicians on stage with the singers, because the singers could infect the musicians and vice versa. So, you know, my little fevered brain said, what's the best way to do it? Make Michael do everything. So that's sort of how we came to that. But that's why this was the little spark, the original spark of the idea. Caitlin, can you talk about when you came into the process? Caitlin directed the piece. When you came into the process, and you know what role you played sort of in the development stages of the piece.
Sure. Yes, absolutely. So when we started talking, we started talking about a year ago about how we were going to make the 2021 season happen, in how we were going to do things outdoors, how we were going to do virtual options, things like that. And pretty early on in that discussion is when Karen started talking to Michael about writing the piece, and so I think pretty quickly, once we had decided that we were definitely moving in the direction of Michael doing a one-man Gershwin, I think pretty soon after I was like, yeah, dibs, I want to do that one. One of my favorite pastimes is making Michael play a lot of songs and sing them and do like too much music for one person. It is one of my greatest joys in life, and I also knew we've been good friends and co-workers and collaborators for a long time now, going back all the way to 365 a year in review, Michael's first year, which is only a few years after my first year as an actor. And 2 years ago, we worked together on So Happy Together, which I directed and Michael music directed, as well as Megan, who was our stage manager on that. Megan wasn't added into our group until later in the planning process, but I knew that me and Michael would work really well together, and I love hearing Michael sing. And I also weirdly enough, I know we're very young, but Michael and I both really love George Gershwin. I have a lot of really great memories tied to Gershwin music. My show choir in high school did like a 45-minute Gershwin medley, that I still have those, like, oh, I remember that moments. So pretty quickly after we decided to do the show, I stepped in as the director. However, there wasn't a whole lot for me to do until the show was written. I think in April is when we had our first read over Zoom. And the show was a bit longer than it is now, and it was pretty much the same structure but slightly different. And then, me and Michael had a few conversations about things that I thought might need clarification, or things that I really really loved and I thought, I want to make sure that stays in forever. But for the most part, my job didn't really start until we were much closer and we were about to go into rehearsals, and I started adding in my ideas for blocking and things like that. But we're also a very collaborative group, and I didn't want to bog Michael down too much with telling him exactly where to stand and what to do, because he's a very capable actor. So the most quote unquote intense work was in the room and figuring out, man, where do we stash all this music? And and oh, Michael hasn't been on stage right for a while. Maybe we should work some of that in. But it was interesting. It was definitely much more of like a later ad. Usually when we pick a show, we've read the script already, and I've kind of got some ideas about what I want it to look like. And this was a much later process, just because the play hadn't been written till the spring. But yeah, that's kind of how I came along to be. I got to come in towards the end and just kind of sprinkle a little fairy dust on it.
Great. Richard, our sound designer. Obviously, you know, part of the sound designing a musical is making sure that the piano and the balance of the mics and that we can hear the singer and etc. But one of the things that we learn about Gershwin that I didn't know is how much he depended on non-musical sounds to inspire his work. And that was sort of fell to you as well. So can you talk a little bit about that exploration?
Sure. I mean, Michael was wonderful in writing the show. He, often would say, I want this version of this song from this person from this year, which made it a fun challenge to find that version, which I wanted to find on vinyl, but, anyways. So it was but definitely then finding the right spot in the song to match what was going to be the little tidbit of that song in the show. So that was quite a fun challenge, as well as finding like the effects of Tin Pan Alley was a worry for me for a while. I don't know why, but it was. But
that was my favorite. Just like, it's one of my favorite sound cues. It's George straight up says it's the absolute noise of it all. It's cacophonous, and Rich is like, Michael, what is this sound cue?
What noise?
Michael's
like I don't.
What? It's in the script. It's several pianos playing all at once. Which I believe, Rich, you actually built that sound cue.
I did. I had to build that one together out of quite a few sounds, but it was beautiful. And then
it's so good. I love that one.
I do too.
I had to use one of my favorite Fats Waller songs within it, so that made me happy. As well as but working with Michael and the piano and all that. I mean, he's so consistent with his singing and his piano playing that it's such a pleasure to do.
Oh, that's a fun fact. I don't know who wants to address it, but we recorded. We also, maybe Richie we recorded Michael's accompaniment of the show, the piano part, and in case, because Michael had some trouble with his neck, some pain, and didn't know whether he was going to be able to play the show, which is very strenuous, for all the performances. So as a backup, we recorded it. What was that like, Rich, making a recording of it?
That was very different for me. Something I hadn't done before. Thank goodness we have some brand new equipment to record things. And recording it turned out to be a pretty easy process. Then it was chopping it up into different pieces, one big long recording. It's what's more terrifying is if we have to use that because Michael can't play, making it look like it's not just a guy sitting at a piano fake playing. And we forgot to say, hey, you should put a note there to tell you when it's starting, and come in and stuff. So that was we've got lots of notes of if we're going to use it, how to use it.
But we haven't had to, right? Or I don't know.
Yeah. We've rehearsed it, but
nope, definitely haven't had to use it, which is great. And most of the songs have introductions, to be fair, but there are like 3 or 4 pieces where I just launch into a song, and none of us thought to add something as a cue. Right. Whoops. But luckily my the issue with my nerve has been under control since I've been here, and I've been able to play all the shows live.
Great. And we hope
another one of my big goals for this show was to make sure that the baby grand looked like a baby grand, even though it's not.
Right.
And I've gotten so many comments from audience members that they were completely fooled, that they thought it was an actual piano.
Yep. So Shelley, what is it? Shelley, our scenic designer, what is it if it's not a piano?
It's just a keyboard in a shell. So it's a wood shell base. Was it originally a grand piano that was gutted, I think?
Baby grand that we gutted, yep.
Yeah. And so then you just fit the keyboard and the amps, right? There's speakers in there too, Rich.
Yep, there's a great speaker that fits so wonderfully, which gives Michael great sound. So he feels like he's actually playing a real piano. And getting the pedal to work was more fascinating than I thought it would be.
That presents a lot of problems to get it to sit still when we wanted it to.
Yeah.
So Megan, who is our stage manager, always, it sort of goes without saying in stage management world that a musical is a little bit more challenging in terms of numbers of cues and accuracy of cues than can you talk about the specific challenges that this show presents over other musicals or or over straight plays that you've done?
Well, I personally, as a stage manager, which everyone who's worked with me knows, I love cue heavy shows. I like shows that keep me on my feet. So I love working with Greg because he can do that really well. But I think the hardest part for this show is that most of my cues start with Michael playing. So I really need to be able to anticipate when he's going to actually start playing the piano and hope that he's going to play it exactly the same way he usually plays it, which we've learned sometimes he does and sometimes he doesn't. So just making sure that me and Michael are kind of in sync, unspoken in syncness at least.
Well, you've done a number of shows together, so that must help with that.
I will say
I know him pretty well.
I was a little surprised when Megan said, I think it was after our first or second performance, she said something about taking her cues off of my breathing, even when I'm just playing the piano, not even singing. I was like, oh, didn't even know I did that. So it's hard to be aware, but
yeah. So I had to like study how you move basically. So I know a lot about Michael Radi.
I think it's also fun how you've got because I get to watch some of Megan calling the show, especially during some of the piano pieces when there's 12 cues lying within this wonderful classical piece that Megan actually has to know music, which is wonderful.
So Shelley,
there's a lot of external noise.
There was one day I was really bummed I didn't have my phone out to take a video, but it was during Claire de Lune, and Megan is literally conducting to herself while looking at the sheet music, not the not the script, but just like conducting to herself and then press the button. And that is very difficult because those, thank goodness we have Michael instead of actual George Gershwin, who never played the same song twice in the same order. And so thankfully, George proper, you didn't have to stage manage him. But it's fantastic to see Megan work. She's great.
So let's taking off of that. What I'm sure I know, Michael, that Gershwin has been he's an iconic figure in American music, and therefore is probably somebody to whom you admire or have looked up to. Can you talk about a little bit about your relationship to Gershwin specifically and what his work means to you as an artist, as a composer?
Sure, absolutely. I think my exposure to Gershwin was just kind of as a kid, hearing Gershwin music being played in places, hearing it in films, and kind of falling in love with it. I very specifically remember falling in love with Someone to Watch Over Me and I Got Rhythm, both as a kid. And then when I was playing piano in high school, I did this competition that I had to have a lot of pieces for. And I remember one year my piano teacher and I discovered that Gershwin had written preludes. And so he has a collection called The Three Preludes. And I played them for this competition. And in the show, I play the second of those three preludes, which I just absolutely fell in love with. And like from that point onward, I think I paid even more attention to Gershwin and who he was and what he did and his importance, especially in the creation of musical theater. So when I was learning more about musical theater in college, I was kind of surprised to find out that really, when you look at it, Gershwin, the Gershwin brothers, when they were writing, they were really writing what a lot of people consider pre-Broadway. They took Broadway from being just vaudeville and the Follies into something more substantial, but it wasn't quite what we know Broadway to be yet. But like, he was so inspired by people like Jerome Kern, who wrote Showboat, and Showboat is lauded as the first musical, the first true book musical. And I think if Gershwin had not died young, his impact on musical theater, not just the American musical canon, but actual musical theater, would have been even more substantial.
So shifting to Greg, our lighting designer, Greg Solomon, there's a lot of there's not a lot of, I mean, it's a little tiny stage and it's one person and a piano. So the light does a lot of the moving for us, which is really cool. The light is very responsive to the music. Can you talk a little bit about that process of making those choices to sort of illuminate the music with light? No.
Yeah, I mean, in a sense, it's sort of freeing. Like the format of the show is kind of freeing for light, because it is all about the music, and like we totally accept the fact that like when he starts playing, we can get transported. And I think for me, the biggest thing was just to be sensitive also to the fact that like it's just Michael on stage, and so like I don't want to overpower him. I want to support him. And I want to support the shifts in the music, but not in a way that's going to be distracting ever. And I think we succeeded. But that was like, for me, the big thing was like, you know, it shouldn't be a rock concert. It should still feel like an intimate evening. And so, you know, kind of finding that balance.
And Greg also did the lights for the other show in the pod, Neat. And I just have to say, as somebody who was a pod 1 and a pod 2 director, you got very lucky, because it now gets dark at about curtain time. So we get to see, on the evening performances, we get to see all of your lights, as opposed to waiting till halfway through the show till the sun goes down. So you were the luckiest of the lighting designers this year.
I know.
And it's lovely. It's lovely. That really makes, you know, I have found that that's what really focuses us in on the performance, is that the light, you know, of course, in the dark, when you see light in the darkness, that's where your focus is going to go. And it's been it makes the audience's experience so much more focused, I think, during the daytime, and probably the actors' experiences as well, I would think. Shelley, so you had to create a penthouse apartment in New York with that was a set that could be taken on and off at the end of every performance, so that it didn't get wet and all of those other things. That's my dog. How did you sort of make those choices of which brush strokes to use to create that sort of super sophisticated world?
I think that we designed it before we had a finalized script. So it was kind of like, we were in an apartment. There needs to be a piano. What piano would Gershwin have, right? So there were like, it was kind of a little bit about the piano, and a little bit about the distance between the piano and the phone, and giving Michael places to go and sit and have a little bit of variety, you know, giving like an essence of the apartment and the post party apartment, versus like having to like recreate the full thing on stage. Like we don't have walls or molding or windows or doors. So I think we were successful in that regard. And then, you know, the skyline of New York, which was so important and central to the story. And then I was really lucky in pod 3 to have Greg as a lighting designer who made it actually dance. So that was fabulous.
Mm-hmm. So Michael, you sort of addressed this in your comments earlier about his sort of classic piano background and the preludes that you learned to play when you were studying classic piano. And I have to say, I've worked with Michael for a really long time, and he's accompanied and he's acted and he's advised, and we've done his play, but I really was blown away by your skills as a pianist. I don't think we've ever showcased them on the BVT stage in such a way. And it is, so Claire de Lune just moves me to tears every time, and how sensitively you play it. It really, So I just wanted to learn a little bit more about you because I don't even know. You started out as a pianist first and then found musical theater late. So you were like a little piano playing guy, or what was that?
Yes. Well, first of all, thank you for those comments. I love playing piano, and it's weird that I don't get to do it much anymore. But yeah, I started out very, very young in the Yamaha music program. So it was kind of general music program. And I took to piano very, very well, and I liked it a lot. And then started studying privately when I was, I think, 7 years old. And I grew up in a classical training program and played all the way through high school with the same great teacher, Pejrit. And then in college, I continued lessons, but it wasn't really my focus. But yes, classical piano came first. And then my love of musical theater kind of blossomed as I was growing up. And then I figured out that I could also play musical theater. Like, that's a thing that you can actually do, that you can buy books and then sit down and play them. But the vocal side came later for me. So I really fell in love with classical music, and Clair de Lune is one of my favorites. So I was very happy when I was reading, it's like, oh, he loved Debussy. I know what I'm doing.
Yeah, you do such a nice job with it.
I also just want to say one of the more joyful, just kind of silly things about this summer is it's kind of fun. Usually throughout the summer, there's like weird connections between the shows, like, oh, we had a this in this show and also that. And we, during tech, I actually took a video to send to Jennifer Arfston, who was the actress in Florida Girls. And I don't know if you remember, if you saw Florida Girls, but during the pageant at the end, the principal / announcer for the pageant is talking about one of the other contestants as, and that was Claire de Lune. So we've said that just nonstop, and to kind of like sandwich one of the first shows and one of the last shows, and they both include Claire de Lune. It's just silly and it makes me glad.
Great. Be sure, folks, if anybody watching from home, well, we're all in our homes, aren't we? If any of our attendees that aren't panelists have questions, you can type them in, or you can type them into Facebook, because we want to answer your questions too, or address your comments if you have them. So it's not just us yapping. But so you know me, I love a mystery. And the play is sort of a mystery because we're waiting on the reviews. And we have that sort of mysterious ending where we get the phone call and we see him take the message of what the reviews are, but we don't read them out loud, and we don't give it. So fill us in, solve the mystery, Michael. What were the original Porgy and Bess reviews like?
The opening night initial big 3 or 4 papers, those reviews were very good. They were solidly good. They praised George pretty well. But within the next 3-4 days after those reviews came out, there was a sizable amount of backlash from the Black artistic community that turned into a New York-wide dialogue across all sorts of musicians, of all types. Some people coming to George's defense, other people tearing him down even more. And it became this kind of like soupy sort of, no one really knew, did Porgy and Bess come off the way that they had hoped? And then the show only ran 154 performances, I think, on Broadway before closing and then touring. But the show didn't become universally beloved and iconic until it went on tour. So it ultimately was a great success, but it also started this gigantic dialogue, especially about race and who has the ability to tell stories. And that is clearly something that we are still dealing with today. So I think that is one of the more interesting things about the way that Porgy and Bess kind of culminated near the end of his life.
Did that have repercussions for the rest of his career, or was it just on to the next thing, or was it a damaging thing for him? I mean, for his career, not emotionally, it must have been painful.
Not so much for his career, but it definitely was painful enough that even though I could find no quotes where he actually said this, I'm pretty sure it's a large reason why he ended up within the next 6 months buying a house in California. And he and Ira went and they worked in the movies for the next several years, but he is quoted several times saying how much he does not like California, how much he loves New York. And I think the reason that he really went out there was because he felt a little wounded after the backlash.
We have a question from Boo Herman, who asks, how did you learn to sound like Gershwin? So are you imitating his voice? And if so, where did you get the evidence? Because I couldn't tell you what Gershwin sounded like. So how did that go?
Yes, I listened to recordings, as many recordings as I could find, which unfortunately there's not that many for free. I'm sure there are plenty in the archives. There seem to be some in the Lincoln Center archives, some in the National Archives. But I'd listened to recordings of him speaking in interviews or from his radio show. And he has this slightly lower range than mine, but he's got this transatlantic accent to him with this heavy lilt that was difficult to find at first. He kind of talks very relaxed and very tight, which is not how I speak at all. I speak kind of wide and up. But finding his voice and the way he wraps his mouth around O's and oohs was very, very difficult and interesting. But I think it's made an impact because a lot of the people will quote lines back at me in the exact inflection that I use. It was fun though.
Well, it's interesting to think about too, because he was just a Jewish kid, right, from New York City, so he didn't have a Jewish New York accent. I think in order to represent a higher society and to rub elbows with the hoi pollois, as they say, I think he sort of may have affected. That's Karen's interpretation.
You can definitely hear his parents both spoke Russian at home, because they were both originally from Russia, and you can kind of hear that in the way that he lilts his speech. It's more similar to Russian lilting, and you can also hear the influence of Yiddish a little bit as well. Even though his parents didn't tend to speak Yiddish at home, he grew up in the Yiddish theater, so he heard a lot of that. And then it's New York City, and they lived in so many different locations. I believe before he was an adult, he lived in 12 different locations within Manhattan. So he just heard all these different types of speech from all these different types of people. And so that had to have kind of mixed its way into his odd speech patterns.
Any other questions from anybody else?
I found it fascinating that Someone to Watch Over Me is one of my favorite Gershwin songs. But when you start playing it, it sounds like you're like rushing it for some odd reason, but that was apparently what Gershwin did.
Yes, if you go back and listen to recordings of Gershwin playing his own music, he plays everything fast, but he especially plays all of the verse material fast, everything before the main part of the song, the chorus. So yeah, that opening of "There's a sinner says a love is blind," like it's nothing, right? You move past, you just get to the actual song. But yeah, he sped through everything.
Yeah, that was sort of the style, right? They sort of wrote a little introductory versy thing before all of the songs of that period. Not just Gershwin, but a lot of different writers. And like Somewhere Over the Rainbow has one, and we never, only when certain singers will trot them out and do the intro, but not some people just start with Somewhere Over the Rainbow or There's a Somebody I'm Longing to See, and they don't do that. So when I was a kid growing up, because I loved that period of music, and would see like Bernadette Peters singing those old standards and the classics on the Mike Douglas show and stuff like that. I loved finding out that there was a whole part of the song that we didn't know, and that she would do sometimes. I thought that's a cool
thing. It came from jazz, like the idea of the verse before the main song, and then that became obviously a standard for just standalone songs, which became the foundation for all classical musical theater writing. So you'll even hear it today in a lot of musicals. You'll hear a verse before the chorus starts. And it's interesting.
Well, great. So Caitlin, who has been leading most of these, has always had has everybody weigh in on a fun and funky question at the end of the show. I don't have a fun and funky question, but I will ask everybody on the panel and even if any of our attendees want to weigh in, they can share too. What's your favorite song in the show? Do you have a favorite song? And I've already revealed that mine is Claire de Lune, which Gershwin didn't write. But it's not my favorite Gershwin song, obviously, but it's a very meaningful song to me. So it's beautiful, and it's so beautifully performed. But if my favorite Gershwin song is probably, as Rich, I think, said, Someone to Watch Over Me. So Caitlin, yours?
Mine, both because I have really great memories of it from back in my high school performing days, and also I love the moment that it happens in the play is The Man I Love. I love so much that Michael wrote a Freudian slip into it, where it's the song is from a perspective of singing about a man, but George in that moment is talking about Kay, so he slips up and says, "She'll take my hand," and I just love that moment.
Rich, what's your favorite?
Mine really, besides Someone to Watch Over Me, is Summertime in the show, just because it's the most fun for me to actually run the board on. So I get to highlight some of those end notes.
Megan?
I was gonna say The Man I Love, but to change it up, I think probably Fascinating Rhythm, just because it's so musical theatery, switching between the dialogue and the music, and it's fun for me personally.
Great.
Not a Gershwin song in the show, but Can't Help Loving That Man of Mine. I listened to Showboat a lot growing up because my parents met because my mom was in a production of Showboat. So they always played Showboat
too. That's cool. It was a big deal for my parents too. Excellent. And Shelley, what's yours?
Oh, Someone to Watch Over Me. Yeah, it's the best.
And Michael, Pièce de Résistance, what is your favorite song in the show?
Well, you've all said the collection of my favorites for various different reasons, whether to perform or to play. But the one I'll add to the list is Shall We Dance, which was a song I didn't really know before writing the show, and I love it. I have a blast every time I get to play.
And of course, I do my curtain speech every night, and I leave, and we start with the clarinet intro from
Rhapsody.
And that is just to die for every time. And I do this whole thing with my arms as I'm leaving the stage, and I try to time it so that I get to the top, and it's so lingering. I never get it right. So I enjoy that. But it's a wonderful, wonderful moment. So thank you all for joining us this evening. Thank you for all of this wonderful panel, for sharing your ideas and your inspirations and in sort of an insight into what we do at BVT. We have just a few more performances, and then our 2021 summer that, like it never was before, will be coming to a close. So thank you all for being here in the Zoom room, but also for any and all of you who have attended our performances live and helped us to bring live theater back to the world, at least our little corner of the world, and to Michael for creating this beautiful piece, and for everybody else who collaborated with him to bring it to life. So thanks for being here. And if you haven't seen Neat yet, come see Neat. And hopefully we'll be seeing you all live and in person very, very soon. Thank you, everybody. Good night.